Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second event in the eighth annual Champinefu webinar series. The title of tonight's event is Cultivating Camas and Communities, Tracing People-Plant Relationships in the Willamette Valley. We're really happy you're here today. My name is Bonnie Brzozowski. I'm a public services librarian at the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library, and I'm just kicking us off. I want to take a quick second just to orient you to the platform that we're using today. So to submit questions throughout this evening's presentation that will be answered at the end of the event, please click on Q&A, or sometimes it's a question mark. It's often in the top left corner of your window. Sometimes it's at the bottom. Just a note that we're going to send a video recording of today's event via email to everyone who registered within approximately 24 to 48 hours of this event. Recordings are also posted on our YouTube channel at the link that I'm going to go ahead and share in the chat, where you can find recordings of previous events from previous years of the Champinefu series, as well as many other amazing virtual events. So let me throw that in the chat here. Bear with me. And there is that link. Great. So to get us started, I'm going to introduce Dave Eckert. He's going to tell us more about the Champinefu series, and he's going to introduce the series co-sponsors as well as our presenter for tonight. Dave is part of the Mary's Peak group of the Sierra Club, and he coordinates this event series. So Dave, thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Bonnie. Really appreciate working with you. So let me, oops. Okay, I did it. Something happened here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with, no, I'm not. Okay, hold on just a second. I'll come back to here. And I apologize about this. I accidentally got off of my PowerPoint. There we go. It'll come up to the beginning. Now share. And okay, so welcome to the Champinefu series, and there is a map of what is Champinefu, which includes Corvallis and Philomath, the Marys River. It really is about the Marys River area, and we started this series in 2017, and have been up to 20 in our 8th year this year. And so one of the missions is to build understanding and relationships with the living culture of the Kalapuya that are from this area. And right from the beginning, from the very first one, before the first one, we worked with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, who has ever since then selected each presentation and the subjects of each presentation, and selected the presenters. So that we've been very excited about the Grand Ronde doing that. And then we have co-sponsors who are funders and administrators of the program. And the first one to be a co-sponsor is the Mary's Peak group of the Sierra Club, the founding co-sponsor. And then the Spring Creek Project was there right in the very first year, project through Oregon State University. And it's a wonderful, if you don't know about it, look it up, the Spring Creek Project. In 2020, the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library became a co-sponsor when we, during the pandemic, and we needed to go online, and been hosting this ever since, and forever grateful to the library for doing this. The Corvallis Sustainability Coalition became a sponsor 2 years ago after a major donor, Francis Stillwell, donated some money, and the coalition is now a major sponsor of this. And this past year, the School of Language, Culture, and Society became or last year became a co-sponsor, and has really expanded our reach and the depth of some of the programming that we do. I'd like to show you where we're going for the next webinar, and I hope you do register. The link is down the bottom. It's on December 4th webinar. And Bonnie will put up in the chat this link for you to register if you have not. This is real special. Natche is a former OSU professor and head of the Indigenous Studies program there. And he just recently took a position down at University of California at Santa Barbara, where he heads the Indigenous Studies program there. And so he's going to be giving a talk on Lower Columbia River art and placekeeping. And it's a really interesting concept of the intentional assertion of Indigenous lands, space, and relations. So I hope you come to that. And of course, we have the one tonight with Molly Carney, who will be introduced in just a second, about Camas and communities. So really looking forward to this and with Molly. And I'd like to introduce you to David Harrelson, who has worked right at the beginning on this and said, I think that we can do this. And he's been what I call the rock the whole time on this. Is coming up with just amazing speakers, amazing subjects, amazing concepts of how this program should go. So, David won't maybe not tell you this, but I'll say it is Champinefu Kalapuya, and that's makes even this more special. And it's been a joy and honor of my life to work with David. And David, take it away. Thank you for doing this.
Great. Thank you, Dave. It's really an honor to have everyone participating tonight and joining us this evening. I'm going to invite our speaker, Dr. Molly Carney, to join us on the screen as well. I'm going to introduce Molly. Dr. Molly Carney is a newer face to Corvallis, but has come to Corvallis as an already established friend and collaborator to the Grand Round tribes. So we're excited to be able to have her as a new professor at Oregon State University. And I thought I'd read her bio to start, which you can find on the OSU website. Molly Carney is an archaeologist who uses paleo-ethnobotanical and ethnobiological and ecological methods to explore how past people interacted with and related to their natural and built environments. Much of her work focuses on life history traits of cultural keystone species to understand how people stewarded floral and faunal resources in the past. Dr. Carney runs the OSU Ecological Archaeology Lab and manages the Northwest Native Plants Database, which provides digital guidelines and resources for botanical and archaeobotanical identifications. She also maintains interest in the architectural signatures of past Northwest places and in using feminist, indigenous, and agency-focused lens to reframe past and present discussions on regional household archaeology. Dr. Carney is currently looking to work with undergraduate and graduate researchers. Please contact her later if you are interested in gaining lab experience. That's my plug. I'll also say that if it was 10 years ago, I would want to be one of those graduate students. And that, through the years, I think that many of you have heard presentations that I've given or as a part of bringing speakers, and we've had a real consistent through line of bringing in speakers to speak about archaeology, about ecological knowledge, and this is a continuation of that. I'm, really honored to be able to have someone who has that experience, like coming into this place. Previous Champinefu speakers that have sort of talked about ancillary or adjacent topics would be Tom Connolly when he gave a presentation about Kalapuya archaeology. These are all before the times of recordings. Sadly, Tia Cody, who did a master's out of Portland State University, where she studied remote sensing and the identification of Kalapuya mounds, is another topic that we've had that's sort of adjacent to this work. And then presentations by myself and Doug Dewar about kind of ecological knowledge and tribal lifeways. So it's a strong fit. I got to know Molly as she was working on her dissertation and her work, because while her main study focus area wasn't the Willamette Valley. She did the type of thing that people should do, which is, okay, I've tried this over here. What does it look like over there? Or, oh, I've heard of this other data set. I want to engage. And instead of just sort of going in and working in a collection and being secretive about it, she employed a really great human subjects protocol. And she reached out to the people of place and engaged with us and asked our thoughts about it, and sort of got buy-in as she pursued to do her research. And I just really admire that. There's a thoughtfulness to your work, Molly. There's intentionality, and I am immensely looking forward to this presentation and all of your work ahead. I think we're already scheming up new things to collaborate on besides Camas. I will say that it also fits in really well with other ongoings that are happening in the Corvallis community. For a couple of years now, we've had a call to action for the prairies to be made purple again. And there's been different collaborators on campus, professors like Lahui Whitebear, David Lewis, and others who have risen to that call, as well as facilities staff and other OSU community members that have said, well, can we make some of the properties that OSU owns purple again? Can we have purple prairies? And this work all helps inform that. And it's really exciting what's happening around the topic of Camas at OSU. And with that, I just please, we don't clap, I guess, on virtual Zoom, but we'll all send good energy towards Molly and welcome her. And I'll turn it over to Molly.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm honored to and touched to have had such a great relationship. So thank you, David, and thank you to the organizers as well too for putting this on. Now, I want to also just take a second as well too and share that originally I grew up in upstate New York, and I made my way out to Washington actually as a graduate student, and just fell in love and became part of the greater Northwest region. And so while I don't trace my home necessarily to this place, I am very excited to live here. I've lived here for about a year now, although I have been visiting for the last 4 years or so. And I'm really excited to be a part of this greater community too. So all that I have to say today as well about the archaeological and anthropological relationships between people and Camas and communities will be from my relative newcomer perspective. So I'm here to learn with an open heart. Now, the Pacific Northwest is really known as a place. It's world renowned as a place where people managed and cared for landscapes and cared for their associated species. There are numerous oral histories, expansive ethnobiological literatures, and people are continuing to manage these places. People use cultural or prescribed fire to create and maintain ecosystems and habitats. We see the selective harvesting of specific plants or salmon or shellfish. We have evidence that people were intentionally translocating specific desired species to create forest gardens near residential sites. I'm particularly excited about some of the work coming out of these places. All together, though, these constitute created and cared for landscapes. But adding time depth to some of these histories can be a little bit more challenging to do and really understand just the deep time relationships that people have. So I have on the screen, here's one example of actually a Wapato garden from up in British Columbia, where archaeologists were able to identify a constructed feature that was specifically designed to grow Wapato. So slowly archaeologists are really starting to look at these questions in the past to try to really understand how people created and maintained these landscapes. So most of my work is really trying to understand and flesh out the broad ways that people care for spaces, places, and those species, those plant and sometimes animal kin. I have a few animal projects as well. But today I'll broadly share some of what I've learned about people-Camas relationships in this region before I dive into a bit of the archaeological record. I do draw on archaeological data we'll go a little bit nerdy and talk about some of the paleoclimatological data, some of the fire history data sets as well, to really demonstrate how people stewarded or even cultivated camas in the past. But before I get to that case study, I just wanted to think a little bit deeply about what constitutes what we call cultural keystone species, and even just introduce Camas a little bit more to you all. Simply because, well, in the Willamette Valley, I've been pleasantly surprised by how many people know what Camas is and its importance. There are still going to be, there's just a lot to know about it too, and I'm still learning as well. So we can share a couple quick Camas facts. So we may be familiar with this concept of an ecological keystone species, where there are some species within environments that play a very key and important role in the overall structure and functioning of an ecosystem. They're absolutely essential to that ecosystem's integrity. And if you lose one, everything really falls apart. A great example of a keystone species would be salmon, right? And so we've spent a lot of time and effort making sure that salmon survive, because so many other elements within broader watersheds and landscapes and people rely on salmon. But similarly, in human cultures everywhere, there are plants and animals too that form the underpinnings of culture, and they are reflected as fundamentally important within diet, within different types of materials, within different medicines, within language, ceremonies, and even myths and origin stories. And so without these cultural keystone species, the societies that they support would be really completely different. So Camas is one of those cultural keystone species. Camas is actually a member of the agave family. It's not a member of the lily family. It's been relatively recently recategorized using DNA. But there are about 5 or so species, depending on who you talk to, although they all hybridize. So most species that we are familiar with include common Camas, which grows all throughout the Pacific Northwest on both sides of the Cascade Mountains, even over into the plains a little bit. And then Great Camas, which primarily lives from the Cascade Mountains out to the coast. Great Camas is a little bit taller. There are other specific details and differences across the species. However, they're pretty difficult to distinguish archaeologically, and most Northwest Indigenous languages didn't differentiate Camas species. So I'm just going to talk about the genus of Camas as a whole tonight. So Camas is frequently invoked as both an ecological and a cultural keystone. Now, Erna Gunther was an ethnobotanist working in Washington, and she wrote about Camas quite a bit and compared Camas to a plant staple food. And so while we might be familiar with the incredible importance salmon had in past human societies and diets, Camas is kind of the plant equivalent to salmon, and was just as important, if not more important than salmon, in many people's overall diets and lifeways. Now, I mean, Camas is more than just a plant staple food too. We have on here on the screen a snippet from the archives where we have the Kalapuyan calendar, and we can see that different months are named after different types of Camas or different harvesting windows of Camas. We know that it was widely traded. Archaeologically, we have quite a bit of evidence that it was widely traded, and it's valued by communities where Camas doesn't grow, because while it grows in many different locations throughout the Northwest, not every single one, so people would have traded to be able to access it. And we do have archaeological data showing that Camas was traded outside of its at least known geographic extent where it does grow. Overall, we also know too that it was a food that could have been provided for people even in the lean months of winter too. So all of these different aspects of Camas altogether show us that it is incredibly important for many communities, including the Kalapuya. And it also allows us to focus in and trace the way that Camas has had influence within and continues to be influenced as well by human societies and human cultures. So I also wanted to share a little bit show lots of photos about Camas, but also different ways that people engage with Camas. And so Camas is edible. I'll chat a little bit about some of the ways that you actually prepare camas. But before you can even go out and cook camas, you have to harvest it. So around here, camas tends to bloom in April to May. It can vary depending on where you are throughout the Northwest or even what elevation you're at when the bloom actually happens. Now, in this location and generally around here, people would have harvested camas when the flowers were blooming, but that doesn't mean you have to harvest it when the flowers are blooming. You can harvest it later in the season, like in the middle photo we have on here, where the seed pods have actually dried out. You can also harvest it in February as well, too, when the ground is just starting to poke the leaves up. Now, to actually harvest camas, many people used what we call a digging stick. So I have on here an artist's reconstruction of what a digging stick is. So digging sticks would have had antler handles. They may have been decorated based on who would have owned that digging stick. And they would have been attached to a hard piece of wood. Sometimes ironwood, different types of wood may have been used with the sharpened end. And so today I've had the opportunity to go out and harvest camas with a few of my collaborators in Eastern Washington. And we actually have iron digging sticks that some of the tribe that I have also worked with up there that they created as well too. But the fantastic thing about these digging sticks is actually it's like the perfect tool for harvesting bulbs if you've ever been out in the garden. Now, a shovel will work just fine, but it does tend to just slice your bulbs in half, which you don't really want if you're going to go and then cook and prepare camas. But instead, the digging stick will actually get right under your bulb and then pop it out very easily. And so on the right-hand photo I have here too, it's just an example of from when we were out harvesting a few years ago, how fantastic our digging sticks worked. But you can see here too that we're also popping up some of the smaller immature bulbs. Which then you would go ahead and replant and replace in the ground for future harvests. So there are many historic accounts as well of how camas was harvested and prepared, but then people are still continuing to prepare camas in many of these traditional ways. So I wanted to show you a couple photographs too, just of how this process looked and talk through how you actually go through it and cook camas. So the trick with camas is that the bulbs are comprised of complex carbohydrate chains. It's not actually made of starch, it's made of inulin is the form that these complex carbohydrates and sugars are stored in. And so you need to heat these bulbs for a long period of time, several days, to really break down those complex carbohydrate chains and make them digestible. So I have on the screen too an example again from when we've been out harvesting camas in the past. We've harvested the bulbs, we've cleaned them off, we've taken off that papery outer tunic, and they're getting ready to go into the earth oven. So the best way and the most efficient way to cook camas too is to dig out a large pit within the ground. Sometimes these are called pit ovens. And then from there, heat up usually rocks. And so you can either heat your rocks within your oven, you could heat them separately and add them in, but usually there's certain types of rocks will retain heat, other types of rocks might shatter, and so you want to make specific decisions too about what types of rocks you're using to create that heat. You may also choose specific types of wood to add to your fire in your earth oven. Now, there are specific recipes that go with camas and are specific to different communities. And so that is borderline onto what we would call culturally sensitive information and may or may not be shared more broadly. So those recipes can really vary by community. In many historic accounts, we do see though that people tend to prefer alder, which also is a really great wood for smoking and actually has great properties for preserving foods as well too, I've been learning. You might wrap your camas bulbs within skunk cabbage leaves to protect them from the heat of the rocks within your oven. And you may include different types of greenery as well to help steam the camas bulbs, because that's really what you're trying to do in creating these large earth ovens. And so then the earth would be covered on top, and then you would come back a couple days later and unbury the pit, pull out your Camas and have a fantastic meal. So I have on the screen as well too an example of what one of these archaeological earth ovens actually looks like. And so you can see there's a meter stick on the screen, so you can just see how large some of these earth ovens actually were. On the bottom of the screen too, I have an example of a charred couple archaeological Camas pulps. Now, within archaeology, we're really reliant on people making mistakes with their cooking over the years. So most of the time when we excavate these earth ovens, we often find just large features full of fire-cracked rocks. We don't often find the actual archaeological remains of what people are making unless they made a mistake or something fell into the fire. So we have to get kind of lucky and hope that people forgot about what they were cooking, or something may have slipped through the boundaries, fallen against some of those hot rocks, or been kind of tucked into the side of the oven, and then therefore char away to save for us to actually see in the hundreds to thousands of years in the future. And then finally, just what do we do with Camas? So in the top photo is again another photo from some of my previous Camas baking opportunities. In this case, we didn't have skunk cabbage. We used a pillowcase to keep the Camas all together and to keep it safe and when steamed in the oven. From there, traditionally, you may have mashed up the Camas bulbs and moved them into large cakes. From Mackey's Kalapuya source book, includes a quote that the preparation of Camas wrote that people preserve their Camas much better than any others, and that they make cakes of up to 10 pounds in the state that it keeps it fresh and moist. Now, Lewis and Clark also mentioned eating Camas too on some of their voyages throughout the greater Northwest, and mentioned that they'd eaten Camas that had been preserved for over a year as well too, so that these cakes, which people created, and then they would go and air dry those cakes too, could actually store Camas for quite a long time. Now, today you don't have to prepare Camas within an earth oven, though you can absolutely. I know a lot of people will boil Camas as another option as well too, that folks like. I've seen people make it in crock pots, and I've always thought that an Instant Pot would be a really quick contemporary way of cooking a batch of Camas, which would just absolutely recreate almost the exact same conditions that you have within an earth oven going forward. And then finally, to the last thought on this particular point that I wanted to share is that once you have your dried Camas stew, you can actually reconstitute it with different types of foods and recook it up again in many different ways throughout the rest of the year. Now, all of that, though, is a brief introduction to like what is Camas and how do we cook it and why does it matter? So in my work, though, as an archaeologist, I'm trying to understand how people cared and cultivated and even stewarded Camas in the past. And so over the years, since I did my dissertation in the years since, I've tried to be in conversation with communities, and I've learned that people clearly have a vast repertoire of practices that they see as caretaking rather than steering or controlling or managing plants and species and landscapes. And so several authors, several scholars have suggested that the term stewardship more accurately reflects notions of respect and reciprocity that are common within many Indigenous worldviews, and that the concept of stewardship really recognizes the long-term relationships that people have had and continue to maintain with plants. I've actually had a student recently critique the concept of stewardship and the name of where stewardship came from, but I think that since the greater natural resource and cultural resources community have generally bought into it, it's here to stay. So in light of these world-taking views and thinking about how people care for Camas and even references to Camas as kinspeople, I've been really purposefully trying to shift and be careful about the language that I use to really reflect those relationships. So I'd like to turn now and talk a little bit about a study that I conducted over the last 4 years and that I hope to expand upon in the future to really look at these deep time histories of stewardship. And so following our ethnobiologists and our ecologists, I'm interested in trying to explore some of these relationships across several different scales. So many ecologists classify or think through different types of scales of different people, plant, and animal relationships. So thinking about populations, so just groups of organisms that live in a place at the same time. Thinking through communities of plants, so interacting groups of various species within a common relationship, and then even landscape practices, so larger geographic spaces and areas characterized by diverse interacting communities and even interacting ecosystems. And so all together, we can use this framework to try to understand a little bit more about these people-Camas relationships in the past. But before we look a little bit more at the archaeology, I want to throw just a couple more Camas facts out on the slides. So Camas, because they are relevant to the overall story that we're telling tonight. So Camas is a perennial in that it takes 4 to 5 years before the plants flower and reproduce. Now, Camas also produces and grows from a bulb. And so when I am speaking about Camas, sometimes I use, and I guess it's an older reference now too, but it's easy to think about Camas. Almost you could create the analogy of an onion. So onions have layers. Ogres have layers too, technically, but Camas also has layers. And so these layers are actually leaves. So they're underground modified leaves that store food within the plant and are able to help keep the plant through cold and winters and dry summers. So I've worked with many nursery populations with both great and common Camas, and I've actually cut a lot of these bulbs to try to look at these leaf scales. And what I found is that these interior leaf scales, they grow in regular layers, they increase in number over time. Now, it's not a one-to-one relationship like a tree ring. We can't go in and count the number of scales and think that that's the number of years that the plant has been alive. But there are statistically significant numbers of leaf scales associated with immature plants who are not able to who are not ready to bloom and reproduce, and with sexually mature plants who are ready to go and bloom and reproduce. So I've used this deep dive into Camas's life history traits to try to understand how people were managing Camas in the past. Prior to this work, people have tried to explore, say, like the domestication of Camas. And so they thought maybe people were selecting for an increase in bulb size through time. There was a botanist, his name Luther Burbank, who, working in the early 1900s, was able to create very large Camas bulbs after only a couple generations. And so I was able to, one of his arguments is that this could be a new source of food, could supplement the potatoes. However, this isn't one of those. As I look at the archaeological data too, I also looked at change in size over time, but you can select for a variety of different traits within plants. And so focusing in on this age seems to be one that may have been important, as we'll see as we go forward. So moving on to the archaeology and into the Willamette Valley itself, where we are, we're all probably a little bit familiar with where we are situated within space. So I won't spend too much time on this particular slide. However, in the Willamette Valley, we know that at least, people specifically maintained their watersheds where folks were living. We know that at least at contact, we have historic accounts of pre-Kalapuyan lifeways that indicate that people were living in winter houses, moving to harvest other resources during specific seasons and months. In the valley bottoms, villages were relatively politically autonomous with well-defined territories that became a little bit more nebulous in the uplands and in the foothills. And then depending on what type of plant species, there were different rules for who cared for what. So families might plant their own tobacco fields, village clusters might share specific resources like camas or charweed. We could use perhaps the phrase the common pool for some of these species. Now, there have been a couple of really incredible reconstructions of the region's vegetation at that 1850 mark using some of the General Land Office maps. So these reconstructions indicate that the valley was comprised of a really complex mosaic of different plant communities. Even many of these 19th century settler accounts noted that some of the forests growing in the foothills and the mountain ranges too were really actively maintained by using cultural fire to keep the woods open and clear. So my particular study was trying to explore, again, these histories of Camas stewardship by looking at the archaeological bulbs themselves. And so for this particular project, I worked closely with many of the collections at the University of Oregon's Museum of Natural and Cultural History. But as David mentioned too, before any work was really done, in early 2020, I reached out and I sent a proposal over, and we had a conversation about the research design and wanted to make sure that this was something that folks would be interested in doing, because I had kind of piloted the method in another region. And so after we were granted approval to proceed with the project, I visited the Museum of Natural and Cultural History in Eugene in November of 2020. It was actually exactly 1 year ago. I remember very clearly, or 4 years ago, excuse me. I remember very clearly. So when I was visiting for a couple of weeks at that point in time, I looked at over 700 Camas bulbs from 11 different sites. And so you can see a distribution of some of those sites on the map. There were multiple sites from the Mill Creek complex, which is located at the I-5 Santiam Highway interchange. So every time you drive north, you can always think about this particular archaeological study and some of Tom Connolly's work as well, since he was the one who excavated the site. And then there are a couple other sites from the Long Tom watershed, as well as the Lynch site. Now, I want to mention as well, too, quickly, that this is not every single archaeological site within the Willamette Valley that has ever produced a Camas bulb. These were just the only sites that I could find that had collections that were archived with Camas. Specifically was interested too in working with archived material, since we wouldn't have to go out and excavate and move any earth. Now, there are many other sites as well too that do include Camas. I just wasn't able to find maybe the box didn't actually have the bulbs in it, or maybe they didn't collect it and it was simply written about within a report. There's another caveat too, that many archaeologists will see these features like you see on the screen, these earth ovens filled with fire-cracked rock, and they'll interpret them as Camas ovens, when in fact some of our work has demonstrated that they might not be Camas ovens. They can be used to cook a wide variety of different types of plant foods. So even hazelnut and acorn nut processing happened in a lot of these same features, for example. Now, to go about and then really look at these forms of stewardship, and this is where I have a couple graphs. I'll try to move through them quickly too, so we don't get bogged down. But again, looking at those leaf scales, similar to tree rings, but not quite exactly, I was trying to identify, what we would call selective harvesting, where people are intentionally harvesting only those mature plants and then leaving those immature plants within the ground or replanting them. And then my alternative hypothesis too is just that maybe people are grabbing plants across these different life categories and life stages for whatever reason. So I put together some paleoclimatic data sets. So I have a proxy for precipitation on the left-hand side. So generally just if you're over moving between drier and wetter periods in the Pacific Northwest. I have a summarized palynological reconstructions. So orange to yellow would be warmer than average. Blue to purple would be cooler than average. Green is relatively on par with what we're relatively used to these current days. And then I also have a fire reconstruction in the center, so graph number B. And so this is a lake core that comes from Beaver Lake, so relatively close by. And this graph just shows charcoal influx, right? So the number of micro charcoal particles into the lake core, which is an estimate of how many fires there are per year that may be putting charcoal into those lakes. So we have data from a wide variety of periods. I'll jump through this stuff really quickly and just get to the interesting stuff too. So I've seen a couple older Camas ovens thrown around, although I haven't actually tracked down the original point, but the oldest securely dated Camas oven that I am personally aware of comes from about 8,000 years before present at the Long Tom, I think it's the Long Tom site. This was one feature which contained hundreds of Camas bulbs. These were the largest bulbs of any that I actually was able to look at. They were also the most mature bulbs as well, too. So this feature comes out of a continent-wide warm period from a climatological perspective. And we think that the paleoecology indicates that at this point in time, the Willamette Valley was characterized by open prairies and Gary Oak ecosystems, were generally established around this point in time. Fire reconstructions too indicate that the fires are about natural in origin. Then there's a bit of a break in time, and from 6,000 to 5,000 and maybe as far as 4,000 years before present, we do see a colder and wetter period, probably pronounced seasonality with hotter and dry summers. This is currently what the palynological reconstructions are interpreting this particular climatic period as. And so during this period, we do see that you have Camas pulled from a variety of different life stages and life categories. So you have your young bulbs and your old bulbs as well too, within the archaeological features during this period. And so this was an explanation that was actually put forth when I had the opportunity to present this research to the Grand Ronde Historic Preservation Office, that maybe people were harvesting during these periods of intense seasonality, and they're grabbing and harvesting Camas during all seasons of the month too, when food stores may have been depleted. And, you know, there is a myth from the nearby Clackamas Chinook too that recalls in early spring, several different types of Camas were recognized as the first foods really available in the seasonal calendar, where Camas quite literally breathes life back into the people. Now, from this period from 3,500 to present, just want to zoom in very quickly so we can take a little closer look at it. We won't belabor it too much because I've already spent too much time talking about graphs. But by 4,000 years before present, the climate seems to have stabilized. And then by 3,500 years, and then up until present, it does appear that primarily mature Camas is harvested in our archaeological features. So the core from Beaver Lake too indicates that fires increase, but the authors of this particular study actually argue that based on these charcoal influx rates, people are the primary drivers of anthropogenic or cultural fire throughout the valley, or at least within this particular lake core. Now, going back to thinking about stewardship and cultivation and community, there's a couple different lines of evidence too that people are caring for both Camas and the broader plant communities at our three different scales. So at the population level, various macrobotanical analyses from the sites that I showed on that very first map indicate that the selective harvesting of only the mature Camas plants really begins about 3,500 years before present, about the same time that those regular, relatively low magnitude fires become common. At the community level, there's two different lines of evidence that I think speak to people's stewardship of the landscape and of Camas. So in other Camas ovens, other species that have been identified are all found within some of these greater Camas oak ecosystems and associated riparian corridors. So your acorns, hazelnuts, ash, oak, dogwood, willow, serviceberries. And again, those cultural fires, we think too that people may have been using those to keep fields clear and open of competitors, to prevent some of those sod or thatch forming grasses from growing throughout the landscape, which are really dampers on Camas. But also to maintain the productivity of other seedy annuals, so like tarweed, for example, or even to keep paths clear and open for hunters or for human travel. And then at the landscape level too, other lake cores with charcoal influx records indicate that people are using fire to engineer mosaics of vegetation communities at different locations throughout the valley. So in the foothills, maybe people are using fire to clear the landscapes for berry production and also for deer harvesting. We see there's relative stability within the vegetation. So again, we think that people are using fire to really create and maintain specific vegetation communities, particularly through other climatic periods that do seem to have affected vegetation communities in other parts of North America, which I think is a really cool finding. And then archaeologically too, during this late Holocene period, from about 3,000 years to present, there's just a whole explosion of material culture. We see widespread mound construction and middens, argued as this physical evidence of people creating landscapes and just marking space and engaging with space. So altogether, I argue that for the past 3,500 years, we really see that people are fine-tuning the age structure of Camas populations and really using fire to create successional ecosystems at both local and landscape levels. So just thinking a little bit more broadly too, as a whole, these selective harvesting practices would have really required that everyone really knows Camas life histories in detail and intimately, and that people have to really work together to agree to only harvest those mature plants. So you really have a community buy-in to care for these particular plants. To maintain sustainable harvests as well, you would have probably had to leave some of the fields alone for what we might think of as fallow periods for a couple of years to allow Camas to restore. So this really would have required quite a bit of coordination. You also would have had people coordinating the timing and execution of cultural fires to help maintain these Camas fields and other fields too. And so altogether, this would have really required community buy-in, community cooperation, and protocols and cultural rules to maintain what we see as millennia of sustainable Camas harvests. There's also other shifts in people-plant relationships throughout the Pacific Northwest at this time too, as well, such as that Wapato garden that I mentioned earlier. And then in another valley that I've worked in, the Pondere Valley in Eastern Washington, we see the exact same pattern within the Camas data as well. And so I think that there are implications too for ecocultural restoration. Again, as someone who is coming to this place and learning what everyone is working on and all the incredible projects that are happening here. But I think that revealing exactly how people stewarded and cared for and created these landscapes really helps us to bring back those practices into contemporary management and restoration plans. And so the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indian communities whose ancestors left behind these Camas ovens are really leading a lot of this work today. So adding color and detail to these histories really offers tangible evidence to support land rights and land claims, while also offering a blueprint that we can expand upon in the future as well. Now, this is just one study. There's so much more that we could do, and I'm excited to continue working with David Harrelson and others too in exploring how people cared for these landscapes in the past. So I have a few ideas about how we could look at maybe signatures of low intensity cultural burning throughout the valley, and maybe offer a method too for others interested more broadly in looking at what that would look like. We also know too, there was only ever really one study, at least that I'm aware of, that tried to look at amendments to soils or tilling in the past. And I think that we could expand upon that as well too, and really broaden some of these studies. Now, finally too, I wanted to just touch on Camas within this greater region. So within the greater Corvallis area, within the Champinefu area. So I took a look at some maps too, and did just a little bit of unsystematic browsing as I get to know the archaeological record a little bit more. So most people, again, who see fire-cracked rocks archaeologically, will assume that they are representative of Camas baking and Camas processing. I have a couple examples of what a fire-cracked rock looks like up here on the screen, but if you've ever had a campfire and you've woken up the next day and a rock's broken in half, then you know what a fire-cracked rock is. However, they're extremely common archaeologically. I've noticed too, in reading the reports for this region, that people will write that they observed fire-cracked rock, but they won't count it or quantify it. And then some reports don't even mention it. And so I'm left wondering, like, did you see it? Is it not even an artifact worth like describing or writing about? And so I think that my brief but limited survey of the region might be a little bit flawed. So I threw together a map really quickly today, and it's not my best map, but it is drawing on the GIS layer that comes from this Christie and Alverson paper from 2011, where they went through and again tried to recreate the vegetation communities using the General Land Office survey maps too. And so let me see. Corvallis is just about in here. If you can see on my screen, it's up in the upper right-hand corner. And so I did go through and was able to find a couple different sites that do have on the Marys River, as well as on Muddy Creek too, that have fire-cracked rock and might potentially be Camas features. A couple people have also reached out to me as well. So I've been speaking with different public institutions and some private landowners as well too. And we're going to do some informal survey, hopefully as a way of getting ready to do a more formal project as I still get to know my feet around this landscape a little bit better. Now, finally too, as I wrap up, for now, I want to mention as well, we've learned so much about Camas and how important Camas is and how prolific Camas is. But before we go out and go out and forage, I want to first say that it is often a best practice to really only go out and forage for some of these foods if you're going out with a knowledge holder or someone who has invited you to join, because there's simply just not enough left of a lot of these cultural keystone edible species for everyone to have some. So think closely and think through what you do and where you go before you do go out and harvest. And then the rules of the honorable harvest are a great way for folks who are just getting into this world to at least think about how much should I harvest. Secondly, I also want to highlight too that you should only pick foods when you're out foraging that you are 100% about. So this on the screen could look like Camas since there are different types of white Camas, but please don't harvest this one. This one is actually called death Camas. And so it is very poisonous and the bulbs look exactly like common or great Camas. So I'll show it again, but just like really be clear that you know what you're doing before anything gets harvested, or perhaps just don't. Wait until you're invited out. The same thing also goes for archaeological materials. So if you do find yourself out on a rock and walk and you see a fire-cracked rock, take a photo of it and send it to me, and then leave it there for others to come and enjoy in the future. So finally, I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone who put together this fantastic webinar series. It's been really great to watch the ones on YouTube and get caught up on all the phenomenal scholarship and work that's happening throughout the area. I also put together like a mini bibliography of Camas and some of the sources that I've used in this research and this scholarship. This is not exhaustive. It is literally just everything that I thought of this afternoon. So I share it though, just in case you would love to take a look at it and learn a little bit more about Camas more broadly. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Molly. That was really fascinating. I learned so much. David's going to join us again. So please, audience, submit your questions. We'd love to hear from you and what you'd like to ask Molly. We do have a few questions that have come in, so I'll go ahead and start with those. So Cindy asks, how does animal grazing impact Camas health in pastures, especially using rotational grazing?
That might be more specific than I'm able to answer.
Sure.
I do know that I've seen deer mow down, but I don't really know as much about grazing, so I'm not sure if I can answer that one.
It's an ancillary thing, but I can speak to mowing regimens, and one of the things that the tribes really actively worked with different public agencies like state parks and others is to just time mowing in a better way to be able to allow the plants to actually go to seed, because then it helps, you know, the population in general be able to spread. A lot of times, if you mow in May, if you have Camas in a patch, it'll actually take out the seed in the plant before the seeds can mature, and so that seed harvest doesn't continue to propagate. But with, you know, it not flowering for 3 or more years, it's after 3 years that you would start to see the impacts of that. There's sort of a delay.
Thank you. And someone asks, how long can the bulbs last to be planted?
So there are specific types of, I think, fungi that will attack Camas. And so I think you're supposed to plant them pretty quickly and plant them snugly and securely to prevent against some of those fungi from attacking. So one of the papers actually on that bibliography dives into that a little bit more.
Great, thank you. And David asks, how many cultures have histories with Camas harvesting?
So Camas grows from just into British Columbia and Alberta, all the way down through the Sierras in California. And there's actually an Eastern or an Atlantic camas as well, too. So pretty much anyone on the West Coast had at least some sort of a relationship or familiarity with camas. I don't know as much about that Atlantic camas, but I mean, it is possible. That was one of the things I was trying to learn when I lived in Arkansas, but I wasn't able to get a great answer.
Thank you. What is the flavor of Camas? Have you personally tried it?
I have. I thought it was kind of sweet potatoey, but David, what do you think of it?
Yeah, it's starchy. It's not nearly as intensely flavorful as people anticipate. It's in our sugar salt world that we live in today, it's very mild, right? It's mild tasting. I think that when you cook it for a long time and you get the sugars that convert over, I think that associate it with something sort of sweet, but it's mildly sweet, right? It's not cloyingly sweet, is how I would describe it. We
When I've
also
had it, oh, sorry.
Well, we had an answered question, but I wanted to add something onto it. David Lewis commented about deer loving to eat the fresh green shoots. And absolutely, one of the things that I found really interesting about that is that the plants respond once they have grazing on them, and they become more fibrous. So often, and they don't send up their seed head where the flower is until after the first shoots come out. So almost every single active camas patch that I'm around and in, it has grazing like damage on it, but the actual grazing doesn't happen to the flower stalk. It happens to the leaves on the outside when they're fresh and green. But then when they become really fibrous, as it grows up and when it prepares to send up its flower stalk, essentially they don't like to graze that part of it. It's not as desirable. So the deer kind of get a little taste, but you still get a productive plant. And it's kind of a cool thing where there's a little bit of a take, but the whole plant isn't, it still reproduces.
Great. Richard asked, do camas plants have pests that may cause serious damage?
Pests, you said?
Pests.
I'm not sure if I know exactly on that one either.
Camas gophers, I guess would be a pest, but besides somewhat of their concern today in their numbers, but when they were largely abundant, perfect meal was finding a camas gopher's den where it's collected all of the camas, and then you've got your protein and your starch all in one place, and you don't have to quite do as much work. And there's ethnographic accounts of the utilization of camas gopher burrows and stores, and essentially going around to look for them. We've even found that in some of the areas where we're propagating camas to plant for restoration, we'll get gophers that move in, and our staff has stepped into the gopher holes that are filled with camas stores. Think like how squirrels put away acorns and other things like that for winter. Gophers do the same with different bulb plants like camas.
John asked,
David, excuse
go
me,
ahead,
David,
Dave.
I watched a bunny rabbit eat 100 of our camas plants at one of our sites. One rabbit, it's just devoured. So bunnies are out there.
Thanks, Dave. John asked, so when you were defining camas as a keystone species, you mentioned origin stories. Could you clarify your reference to this, to origin stories?
Sure. And again, I'll probably pass this one on, but I've I don't have them exactly on my brain, but I have read myths where again Camas is the one that breathes life back to the people, or is included in with salmon as some of their original beings who are helping people come to life within the world itself. So I don't have them like right here, but I could find them for you if you would like to know more.
Thank you. When do the flowers typically go to seed in the Willamette Valley?
Mm. Probably I've only had one summer here, so I may need help as well.
Yeah, generally like mid-July is safe when they've hardened off, and you can see that because the seeds are a really dark black color and they're hard and formed. Until that point, they sort of are a green color. They need to season in their seed pods, and it's a really great sound. It kind of sounds like rattles when you're around and you hear the wind blow in a camas patch when the seeds are ready, because inside the seeds kind of rattle inside of their casing.
I have a few over there actually too. Um,
That's great. How can members of the Corvallis community, including those of us who aren't connected to OSU, help steward camas in our area?
Oh, this is a great question. And again, because I am still learning in this area, I don't have everything down, but I know that there's a garden in Southtown too, I believe, where Dr. White Bear, who we mentioned earlier, is working on bringing that back. And then I would probably pass it over to Dave Eckert too, if you are familiar with any other opportunities that people have to engage.
Well, we just planted about, I don't know, 50 to 100 camas up at Dr. Martin Luther King Park. And then we planted another equal amount at Bald Hill Natural Area in this one riparian zone of Denewi Creek. And we've been planting every year, and it's pretty horrible soil there, so it's taken a long time. We've also planted them at Starker Arts Park across from the duck pond near the amphitheater. And then Bob Hansen is doing a lot of planting, I think with the city and a few other people. I know they did a big planting over at Jackson, adjacent to Jackson Fraser wetland. It was it's on city land. Yeah.
One thing that I just say is, there's a lot of different environmental oriented restoration groups in the Corvallis area, and a lot of them do planting parties, and essentially any of those planting parties, the likelihood that Camas is going to be a part of that is probably pretty strong. But Institute for Applied Ecology is a great nonprofit in the area that does a lot of regular actions, and then the sponsors of this event as well are good outreach and getting on kind of their listservs and emails or events and checking out those websites of those organizations.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we can answer these or not, but there are a few questions just around growing and caring for camas. Like, is there anything that's in particular needed for their care? How would one grow them at home? I didn't know if y'all would want to speak to that or not.
I can if you want, Molly. Yeah, you can grow them in a pot in your backyard. I have my own camas patch just as in like one of my beds in my garden, right? And I dig it up and I collect the seeds and I plant some more there and I spread things out, and I always take a few out and kind of cook you know, just for my family in a small cook each year. I'm not trying to do large production or something like that. Yeah, it's completely viable, possible. It's pretty resilient. I think that the largest outplanting is the Corvallis Plant Materials Center. I think has like an acre that they're actually actively doing for restoration. I don't know if that's still up and current. Sometimes it's limited on funding. But one thing that they just did through the years is they would, put down the tines and they would rip it open every year and basically stir it all up, so that the camas didn't, because they'll keep getting deeper and deeper into the soil if you don't actually disturb them. And so you want to sort of dig up and disturb and keep them near the top, and you're trying to stop the really carpet grass from like growing in, or clearing out other things. Like a lot of my native strawberry or ground covers sort of will choke them out and they poke up through. But it's like a garden plant. You can absolutely do that. You could do it in a pot on your patio if you had an apartment. You could do it in a raised bed. You could do it at a landscape scale.
I'll just throw in too, now's the time to plant, because as a bulb, it needs the whole winter. It needs this cold resting period. And so this is the window. So if you are able to go out and purchase from a nursery, or otherwise obtain camas, like this is the time period. And you can trick camas. You could put it in the fridge, but put it in the ground and let it get acclimated.
Thank you. Our presenter for our December event actually asked, what are the stakes for making the prairies purple again? i.e., why do they matter?
David?
Sorry, I was reading through the questions. Why do purple prairies matter? Is that, oh,
Why do
yeah.
they matter? Oh.
Yeah, so there's a presentation that we have sort of given in the past that's essentially saying that, Kalapuya people are Camas people, and that and so often if groups of cultures and people can be defined by the starchy foods that they eat, right, or the carbohydrates that they eat, Kalapuya would be acorns and Camas. And so this question about narratives of decolonization or other actions, and like the idea of bringing into this space, I think the real ask of why to make the prairies purple is because it represents abundance and it represents abundant thinking. And that while if the prairies are purple again, there's the opportunity where people can be in relationship with a plant that people of this place have been in relationship with a long time. Whether that's just seeing the beauty of what it is and that's enough, whether there's enough to share, there's enough to eat. And when I say enough to share, I just don't mean humans eating. There was some other questions in our chat about pollinators, about other animals that use these things. Something when it comes to the whole food ecosystem, and you have those available resources, that's going to support abundance. And so there was a feeling that it was simple enough to have a vision, which is make the purples prairie, or make the prairies purple again. And that's based also on these old accounts of some of the first settlers to arrive in the valley, saying that when they looked out on the horizon, they thought there were lakes because of this purple blue color. And when they would get close, they just find that it was another sea of camas, because the camas was so thick in the valley. And camas can range in color from purple to blue to white, pink, right? All those different crosses that Molly was talking about, like the genetics of camas. But that was our idea behind why the prairie should be purple.
Thank you. And David Lewis was asking, is there a good study of pollinators yet?
I'm sure there is, and I think that would be a great question to ask maybe the Cascadia Prairie Oak Partnership listserv, which is a really active organization, or even just some of our colleagues who are a little bit more engaged in the ecology of Camas itself. I think too, oh, I'm blanking on a name, but I think we could find it as well.
Thank you.
Before
Another
we go
David.
on,
Go ahead.
I've spent some time at a couple of the sites we attend with Camas. And when I'm just sort of looking at them while they're in bloom, I generally see insects I have never seen before in pollinating it. And so that's always fascinated me. It's not just your honeybees and your or mason. I just don't have a clue what those insects were, but I hadn't seen them in any other plant. So that was encouraging to me that they're really attracting some insects we normally don't see.
I'm hearing from the audience that someone says Susan Kephart has a lot of pollinator work. Someone else says Dr. Gail Langoletto at OSU has worked on some native pollinators and camas. So thanks for that, y'all. Let's see, there's a lot of questions, so I'm just trying to scan through. I missed a question from earlier. Is there anything you can share about relationships between the people, the camas, and endemic voles? Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if that was something we could talk about. We talked about that. Oh, are there any qualities of good cooking rocks that are informative? And how often do rocks crack in historic ovens?
I could talk about rocks in general, although again, I am still learning about this area. So take this with a grain of salt. I've seen that like granitic rocks too will hold heat pretty well. Typically you don't want anything sedimentary because it'll shatter a little bit more quickly. So you'd want something that's relatively fine grained to be as a cooking rock. There's been a lot of research too, actually, on the stones that people use for different types of heating or even stone boiling. The degree of breaking is generally thought to be a product of the rock type, how hot it gets, and then the number of times a rock is used as well, too. So sometimes you'll be in a great place where you have a lot of raw material. Sometimes you will be very far away and you have to truck all that hot rock material in as well, too. And so in that case, you may want to reuse bits and pieces, and you get even a little bitty tiny bits of shatter within your fire cracked rock. But this 2 summers ago, I was working on a site and we weighed literally tons of fire cracked rock that came out of some of these features.
Thank you. Are tarweed and camas cultivation and harvest entwined or related? Both use rock ovens.
That's a great question too, and something I'd like to explore more, but I probably can't speak to it at this point in time.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah. Tarweed, yeah, it's different. Tarweed and seeds are parched with small rocks, like in a tray, whereas like long-term cooking is what camas is. Tarweed seeds don't need to be cooked for a really long time, the same way that camas does. So yeah, there's rocks, but it goes back to how rocks were used to boil water in watertight baskets. And essentially, small circular rocks would be used and heated up in the fire and put in watertight baskets and stirred. So those same small rocks would essentially be put in a large bark tray referred to as a chalb, and then you could put seeds in, and essentially you could move the rocks, or you could just put charcoal even directly in with the seeds. And when that happens, it would pop the seeds open, and then you could winnow and chafe. So I don't, besides that, there's references and accounts of processing camas into cakes and then adding other things into it, as like a food source, whether it be berries or tarweed seeds or nuts. There aren't sort of accounts of combining meat like the way that Plains people made pemmican, which you'll hear about being like fat and meat and berries. That isn't a thing. of like adding meat in with camas. But yeah, there's that relationship as like a food. It's also really unclear about all the seed plants. There's tarweed, Mattia elegans, and sativa. But there's it also could have just been a really catchphrase for all the other seed prairie plants like checker mallows and others that also have edible seeds. So it's sort of that example of everything becomes known as the one thing that's most recognized. But there were a lot of edible seeds of traditional foods.
Thank you. David, I feel like we may have more or less covered most of these questions. Were there any others that stood out to you that we didn't seem to really get to?
No, there was some really great details put in by a member
There
of the
was.
Round community that there is a planting event and First Foods November 9th. So coming up this weekend, it's at Champinefu State Park, and it's a partnership between the tribe, Institute for Applied Ecology, and state parks. So you'll be able to find information likely on the Institute for Applied Ecology webpage or state parks, the Champinefu Park. It starts at 9 o'clock. And if you're interested this weekend and wanted to be involved in prairie work, that's going on.
Awesome. And then David Lewis says LCC has a, or is that LBCC has a Camas event in 2 weeks, Sunday. So you can look for that as well. Thank
Great.
you. Thanks everybody for telling us about those opportunities. Awesome. Well, I think that's probably enough for tonight. Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you so much, David. Especially Molly, thank you so much for that wonderful in-depth presentation. That was really fantastic. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, David, for helping coordinate. Thank you, Dave, in the background for all of your efforts. And thank you, audience. Thanks for being with us tonight, everybody. We look forward to seeing you in December. Have a good night. Bye.